Welcome, brave listener. Settle in, but not too comfortably. Listen closely to the creaking floorboards, the subtle whispers. They herald the terrors within our tales tonight. Remember, the most chilling monsters are often born in your mind. We're delighted you joined us. Let the unsettling begin. Story 1. So I know I'm supposed to say how old my BF is. But part of my whole problem with this relationship is that I don't know how old he is. He won't tell me. I keep asking him, and he's like, I'm as old as you want me to be, babe, or old enough, or your mortal mind cannot fathom the eons of suffering I've caused. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, just tell me, are you in your 30s or 40s or what? Like, stop being vain already. He's so secretive, too. I'm like 99% sure he's married or something, because he only hits me up at 3 a.m. Red flag. Like, on the dot, though, so he's punctual. Green flag. Every time, it's the same story. Full moon, 3 a.m. He shows up at my front door, right underneath the creepy old crucifix that my dumb old neighbors nailed to the wall upside down. They're like beep-so-bep weird. You don't even know. They forget their clothes all the time. And they keep watching the same old movie. Something called Parsley's Child, or Sage's Offspring. Something herbal. I'm looking to move soon. They give me the creeps. Anyway, the guy shows up for his beep, all shadowy and mysterious. And he comes in and won't even take his sunglasses off because he says he has weird eyes. Such a lie. I know he just thinks it's cool. He's such a dork. It's kind of cute. He took forever to even tell me his name. And when he did, he made me pinky swear that I wouldn't Google it. Actually, he said something like, vow on the blood of an innocent. Totes weird. But whatever. I just really wanted to know his name. Then when he finally told me, I was like, dude, I totally beep don't care beep. If you have a weird Greek name, a person can't help it if their parents named them Asmodeus. The weirdest thing about Asmodeus is that the beep is beep-so-bep good. It blows my mind. As in, I never remember it. He just sort of gathers up his beep afterwards and leaves. Then he doesn't text me until the next full moon. So here's my problem. Every time Asmodeus and I bang, I get sick. Not like morning sickness or mono or whatever, like just beep sick beep. This one time, I got polio for like a day. Then another time, I totally got rabies. Now I have the coronavirus. But don't worry, I'm not contagious. It goes away when I do this weird chant that cool neighbor I told you about, the faith healer, wrote down on a piece of paper for me. He said all I have to do is light a candle, say this chant thing, and wave a black crystal around, whatever kinda goofy. But this crystal was totally made for me. It really raises my vibration. When I hold it, I almost feel possessed by this great, happy, kinda scary like I could destroy the world, help me what is happening to my life power. At first I worried that I might be getting sick all the time because I've never been vaccinated for, like, anything. But vaccines are, like, demonic. I avoid them like the plague. I'm smarter than all those government sheep. Like Baba, am I right? My body will never be polluted with those vaccines. The downside to getting sick all the time is that I'm starting to get a little beep. That's where I draw the line. Like I can handle the occasional case of Ebola if the beep is good. But I beef beep to look good in a bathing suit. I need to know how to let Asmodeus down easy the next time he texts me at 3 am to say, "Are you a willing host tonight? It's getting beep-so-bep serious. You guys, I almost look pregnant, and I'm starting to feel kind of funky. Like maybe he gave me a tapeworm this time, or some other freaky parasite. I can, like, feel it moving. My neighbor tells me not to worry about it, to embrace it, that this is a gift. Totes a weird thing to say. I think he means something like, enjoy the time off work, or like, being sick makes you appreciate being healthy. Although he also said something once like, the apocalypse is nigh, the Antichrist quickens. I don't know what that means. Duh. I'm so beep. He's talking about accounting. Quicken. How could I miss that? What even is wrong with me? It's the whole apocalypse comment that threw me off. It must also be some kind of accounting term, like slang for the end of the fiscal year, instead of the end of life and humanity as we know it. Anyway, like, Asmodeus and I have to break up. It's important. What do I say? He doesn't seem like he would take rejection well. Once I was like, maybe not tonight. I'm getting over my period. And he was like, thou shalt not spurn the seed of Asmodeus. And I was like, dude, okay. No need to quote Shakespeare at me. Come on over, beep. I remembered the name of the movie. Time Infant. I'm getting so forgetful. It's this tapeworm, or whatever. Story 2. Don T. Get off until you hit the 9th floor. No exceptions. But my interview is on 5. I replied beep, ILL. Only say this, only one more time. Don T. Get off until you hit 9th. No other floor is safe. Beep it as crazy. But something about the way he said it penetrated my skull. He was serious. Beep and beep. He looked nervous, like he had to fight every instinct in his body. To say that, to me the doors closed. While I thought to myself, who the beep says anything like that? as I went to hit the button for the 5th floor, some anxiety came over me. I shook it off and pressed it. Beep, the guy was probably just off his rocker's beep. The elevator went up. I scanned my surroundings. A TV bolted to the top corner of the elevator. A mirror for the back wall of the elevator. And some cozy, lounge-style music playing. Pretty standard stuff. Beep, now arriving at the 5th floor. Beep, weird, not sure if I'd ever been in an elevator. That announced each floor it was arriving at. I was sure that if I worked in this building, this would get pretty old quickly. Ding. The doors opened on 5. In front of me was a reception area with a woman seated at the front desk. She stood up from her seat. Mr. Davis, you early. The gentleman's warning from earlier played in my head. We'll be ready for your interview in a few moments. In the meantime, please feel free to take a seat. Thank you, I responded. If I am, early, maybe I can come back in a few minutes. Nonsense. We'll see if we can speed things up. He's been very excited to meet you. The elevator doors started closing. I held them open. I wasn't sure what to do here. But everything seemed fine enough. Granted, the receptionist did seem a bit eager. Beep. But beyond that, from my vantage point, I scanned the office space behind the front desk area. All looked normal cubicles. Folks clicking away at their computer. A kitchen area. Pretty unremarkable, that is. Except for the portrait off at the far end of the office floor. It was very large. I couldn't tell what the picture was of. But I did see a group of employees staring at it, almost admiring it. Your wife's name is Meredith, right? I froze as the receptionist's question beep dart right through me. I didn't remember the job application form ever asking for my wife's name. You too are thinking of having children, right? If it's a boy, you want to name him Sam. What? The beep. Forget that she was right on the money. This was something I'd never spoken about before to anyone, including my wife before I could answer. The office workers surrounding the large portrait started singing the happy birthday song loudly. In complete and perfect unison, someone brought out a birthday cake and presented it to the portrait, a portrait that, after a bit of squinting, I realized was a very large version of my high school yearbook photo I backed into the elevator and pressed the close door button. I panicked as it took its sweet time to register. Press, press, press. Come the beep on after what felt like an eternity. The doors started closing. As they closed, I heard the receptionist, I am so curious to know what your insides taste like, Michael. Beep, 9th floor. I needed to go to the 9th floor. I found the 9th floor button and pressed it. It felt like it didn't register my push. So I pressed the button again and again. Come on, come on, come on. 9th beep floor. I tried again and again, but nothing was happening. Beep it. Beep ILL, go back to the ground floor. Beep, I thought to myself. Back to the start-as. I went to press the G button. I realized it was missing. Beep, just that one singular button gone. Beep, beep, I was getting claustrophobic. I took in deep breaths to prevent myself from having a full-blown episode. The elevator started moving up again. A panel above the elevator doors lit up with the following number. 11 beep, someone was calling the elevator. Beep, I started talking to myself to self-soothe. It's okay. Someone will call the 9th floor soon. That is where I'll get off. As the elevator approached its new destination, I noticed that the background lounge music in the elevator had changed. It was now an instrumental arrangement of Happy Birthday. Beep beep. Not sure why this thing thought it was my birthday. I glanced at the weather report on the TV. At least it was going to be sunny all week. Silver linings. Beep, now arriving at the 11th floor. Beep ding. The doors opened. I hung around the inside corner of the elevator, beside the buttons. No need to have another nightmarish experience. Right. An old woman stepped onto the elevator. Beep, great. I am sure this will be easy to explain to her. Beep. She smiled at me. As the doors closed with a lump in my throat, I asked, what floor? Ground floor, please. I am sorry, Ma, but that button is missing. Maybe we could wait until someone calls us to the 9th floor. 9th. No, I think I'll just go to the 2nd floor instead, then. She went to press the button. Ma, I don't think it be safe to I have plenty of friends on the 2nd floor. It'll be okay. And she pressed it. I didn't feel comfortable cornering an elderly stranger in a seemingly haunted elevator, but I tried again to convince her. I know this sounds weird, but I have it under good authority that the 2nd floor probably isn't safe. I'd strongly recommend not getting off until we reach 9. She smiled. Dear, it'll be all right. You know, I like to take all opportunities that are given to me. It's a shame that you turned your opportunity down. I know the folks on 5 are very disappointed. I backed up into the corner of the elevator. I saw the reflection of the old lady in the elevator's back mirror. She looked ghastly. Otherworldly. Beep, now arriving at the 2nd floor. Beep, the doors opened. She smiled at me again. And then exited. I poked my head around the corner to look at the 2nd floor. It was damp. It looked old, more like a cave than an office. I heard a low, rumbly man dressed in a fancy suit approached the elevator doors and held them open before they could close. You getting off here too, champ? I heard that 5 wanted you. I think we can give you a better offer. I am good. You sure, bud? The salary is $800,000 every hour. I am good. I am kidding, bud. The salary is we remove your eyes so you don't have to see him. The floor went pitch black. The low rumble got much louder and started reverberating in my ears. Suddenly, the businessman grabbed me by the collar and tried to pull me out of the elevator. I clung onto the ends of it. Beep, beep. I started kicking and headbutting him. I was able to make him let go of me momentarily as I desperately pressed on the close doors button. Miraculously, the elevator responded much quicker this time, and they closed immediately. I tried the 9th floor button again. Didn't he work? I pressed 8 instead. Beep, anything to get away from this beep hole of a floor beep. I heard a loud banging on the door as the elevator started taking off, like an aggressive knock bang, 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 as I saw the floor numbers rising -345. The banging continued, just as loud. Beep, what the beep, 6th floor, 7th floor. The banging on the door didn't subside. Beep, now arriving at the 8th floor. Beep, I pressed the button for the 23rd floor. Just as we arrived on 8, I mashed the close doors button just as the elevator doors were about to open. The banging continued as the elevator doors started denting the elevator. Continued going up point 9, 10, 11. The banging softened point 1, 4, 15 and softened point 19, 20, 21 and disappeared. Beep, now arriving at the 23rd floor. Beep, it was gone. Thank beep, beep, I exhaled. It felt like ID narrowly avoided disaster. The doors opened. I scanned the new floor, and I realized I was back on the ground floor. That's what it looked like anyways. Beep, did I escape? Was I finally free? Beep, a man stood not too far from the door. He looked familiar, but I couldn't exactly place him. Hey man, he spoke. Beep, was this the guy who got off the elevator just as I got on? Beep, hey, it's over, man. You got out, he told me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I had to fight it. But you said the 9th floor was the only safe one, right? That was a trick. You followed your gut, and you were right. 23rd floor, the real safe floor. You can step out now, man. I didn't leave. There's someone here who really wants to see you. Beep, I couldn't move. Beep, he wants to give you a job. He thinks you gonna be great. Beep, why? The beep couldn't I move. Beep, he's in the other room. I am gonna fetch him, okay? all you have to do is look at him. It'll feel a bit weird at first, but then it'll all be okay. It's a permanent position. Great benefits. It beep fully on site. But no better birthday present than a new job, right? I lowered my gaze to the floor. I forced myself to mutter the following words. It's not my beep birthday, as he left to fetch whoever he was meaning to fetch. He gave me the following response. Relax, man. No cursing on the job. We're a family here. It felt like I could only move a centimeter at a time. A true snail's pace. I inched my finger closer and closer to the closed door, but I heard footsteps. He was coming back with every fiber of my being. I pushed through. I hit the button the doors closed, and I collapsed to the floor free from whatever weird force was stopping me from moving. I'll let you two talk more on the elevator. I heard him say from outside the doors beep what? Beep instinctively. I looked around to my surprise. There was nothing. The elevator was the same as it had always been, a lengthy exhale. I was done with all of this. At this point, I would be taken death over continuing this beep any longer as I pondered my next move in this hopeless situation. I noticed something strange. The button to the 9th floor was lit up, an ominous crimson-red color before I could do anything else. My phone started ringing. I checked the call. It was my Wi-Fi answered. Babe. Beep. I don't know why I didn't even think to call you. I am trapped in an elevator. And beep up beep is happening. And maybe I should call the cops. Beep I hun. Don T go to the 9th floor. What? W8. How do you even it's a trick, honey? You have to trust me. The man from before was lying to you. It's not safe. Beep, none of this has been safe. Beep, how do you even know everything that is happening? You just need to trust me, hun. I paused. So what do you want me to do then? A demon on the other side of the phone answered this time. Beep, go to your interview. Beep, I hung up the call, and in a panic, I mashed on the 9th floor button. The elevator started rising again, even with me hanging up the call. The muffled sound of the demonic voice coming from my phone continued. Beep, go to your interview. Beep, beep, G-O. To your interview. Beep, beep, G-O. To your interview. Beep, I pulled out my phone and flung it to the ground as hard as I could. I stomped on it angrily. The warped sound of beep, go to your interview, beep, slowly started dying out, but suddenly the elevator started shaking. It was continuing to go up, but it was faster than usual. Really beep fast all of a sudden, almost like the 9th floor was now beepway below me. Beep. It felt like an amusement park ride with no brakes on it. Loose. Dangerous. flinging up at an insane speed, almost as if it was falling upwards. But I pressed 9. I screamed to myself. Exasperated it, didn't he matter beep, now arriving at the 41st floor. Beep beep, what the beep? I was brought to my knees by the speed of the elevator, traveling faster and faster beep, now arriving at the 90th floor. Beep, the buttons, didn't he even go past 52 beep? Now arriving at the 141st floor. Beep beep, now arriving at the 230th floor. Beep beep, now arriving at the 401st floor. Beep, I felt like I was inside a bullet. The pleasant voice of the elevator lady was getting deeper and deeper. As we rose beep now, arriving at the 840th floor. Beep, the voice started croaking. A demonic sound this time. Beep now arriving at beep beep. SOMEWHERE. NIC beep. A sudden halt. The elevator stopped. The doors didn't he open though. The panel above the elevator doors had no indication on what floor we were on as I sat. I heard what could be best described as the sounds of beep coming from outside the elevator. Low grunts of pain, crackling. Beep, a dark hymn beep. Was this where I was supposed to get off? Before I could ponder the question further, I heard a soft tapping on the elevator. A voice from outside. Do you want to trade? Said the voice I decided to bite. For reasons I still don't fully understand. What do you mean? What if you stay on this floor forever, and I get to go home? I think I am good, but I really want to go home. It almost sounded like the voice of a kid. Beep, beep. I am sorry, kid. I mustered back. It's okay. An awkward silence between us. He told me that he wants to wish you a happy birthday, said the kid. I think he got it wrong. Today isn't my birthday. It is, he responded. It's the first day of your new life. Your birthday. He wants you to look at the TV. Beep what? Beep, I looked at the TV in the top corner of the elevator, hoping to see the one constant ID had during this whole cursed trip the weather instead. The TV was now showcasing what looked to be CCTV footage, grainy footage from a camera of the exact elevator I was in. Beep, a live feed of this exact moment beep, except the TV showed me lying down, looking up with a wide smile on my face and something above me on the ceiling, looking straight down at me beep. Him beep, the lights in the elevator went off. The elevator plummeted downwards. As I closed my eyes and screamed for dear beep li-fi, waited for the impact for what I knew was my demise beep. Here it comes beep beep, here it beep comes beep beep. I am not ready beep beep. I am not ready at all beep beep. now arriving at the 9th floor. Beep, D-I-N-G. The doors opened. Beep, wait. What? Beep, beep, 9th floor. Beep, I peeked out from the elevator. Another reception desk. Beep, wait. Is this really the beep? I was interrupted by a voice from the outside. You coming out? Or what? You beep, beep. I got to my feet. The feeling of distrust, anxiety, whatever you call it. My beep fear, intuition beep. It was gone. I felt light. Beep it. I stepped onto the floor and approached the counter. The receptionist handed me what looked like a button for the elevator. For the ground floor, she said. Single use only. I took it and headed towards the elevator. Then I turned back to face her. Can I maybe take the stairs? She shook her head. If you didn't like the elevator, then you really not gonna like the stairs. Beep, fair enough. Beep, I got into the elevator. I said a silent prayer to myself. As I put the button where it belonged, it fit. Without any issue I pressed it, and the elevator went down. It was a smooth ride. Beep, now arriving at the ground floor. Beep, D-I-N-G. As I got ready to exit, I realized that the ground floor button was missing once again. Beep, strange. Beep, I didn't linger on it. I marched out, ready to get the beep out of this building. I noticed a woman running onto the elevator. I tried to stop her, but something in my body wouldn't let me. The most I could muster was putting my hand on the door to relay a message to her before the doors closed. Don't get off until you reach the 9th floor, no matter what. The woman just smiled at me. Happy birthday, Michael. /++++. Story 3. The silence of Blackwater Cottage wasn't peaceful. It was a held breath. Dr. Aris Thorne, historian specializing in obscure local folklore, had chosen it for precisely that reason: isolation. He needed quiet to decipher the crumbling, water-stained journal of Elias Prentice, a 19th century recluse obsessed with the Watcher in the Fen. Aris scoffed initially. Superstitious ramblings. But the grant money was good, and the cottage, nestled deep in the soggy embrace of the Blackwater Fens, was cheap. The first week was merely unsettling. The sheer depth of the quiet pressed in, broken only by the gurgle of hidden streams and the mournful cries of unseen waterfowl. The damp permeated everything, a cold kiss on the skin that never quite dried. Aris attributed the faint, coppery tang in the air like old blood and wet earth to decaying vegetation. Then came the misplaced things. His favorite fountain pen, always kept precisely parallel to his notebook, would be found perpendicular. A mug of cooling tea he knew he'd left on the desk would be sitting cold on the windowsill, overlooking the stagnant mere. small things, easily dismissed as forgetfulness in the monotony of research. But Eris was meticulous. It pricked at his nerves. He started noticing the reflections, not his own exactly, in the rain-smeared window panes at dusk, or the dark surface of the water in the wash basin. His reflection would seem delayed. He'd turn his head, and the reflection would linger a fraction too long. Its expression subtly wrong a slackness around the jaw. Eyes slightly wider, darker. When he'd looked directly, it snapped back to normal. A trick of the low light, he told himself, his eyes straining from deciphering Prentice. Cramped script Prentice. Journal grew more fevered. He spoke not of a ghost, but of something older, something that predated, a consciousness that wasn't malicious, not in a human way, but indifferent and hungry in a manner beyond comprehension. It didn't haunt, it infested. It was the silence between heartbeats, the rot beneath the peat, the slow seep of water through stone. He called it the deepening. One rain-lashed night, Eris awoke gasping. The coppery smell was overpowering, thick enough to coat his tongue, and beneath it a low, rhythmic thrum, not a sound he heard with his ears, but a vibration felt in his bones, in the roots of his teeth. It seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cottage. He flicked on the lamp. Nothing, just the drumming rain, but the vibration persisted. A deep, resonant pulse that made his fillings ache. Sleep was impossible. He sat hunched at his desk, Prentice journal trembling in his hands, the words blurring. It perceives through absence, feeds on the spaces we leave behind. The silences we cannot fill, the manifestations escalated, walking back from the outhouse. His torch beam cut through the mist rising from the mirror. For a terrifying instant, the beam illuminated not the familiar reed-choked bank, but a vast, smooth expanse of wet, black stone, veined with luminescent green, that pulsed in time with the thrumming in his bones. It stretched into impossible distances. He blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the familiar, slimy reeds. His heart hammered against his ribs inside. The geometry of the cottage began to feel off. Doorways seemed subtly narrower than he remembered. The hallway stretched longer in the gloom, the far end dissolving into a darkness that seemed thicker than mere shadow. He'd walk from the kitchen to the study and feel a disorienting lurch, as if he'd traversed more space than physically possible. The air grew colder, damper, clinging to him like a shroud. The coppery smell was constant now. Underlying everything he found the painting, hidden behind a false panel in the crumbling chimney breast. Wrapped in oilcloth, it wasn't signed, but the style was unmistakably Prentice. It depicted the mere at twilight, but wrong. The water wasn't reflective. It was an abyss, a void of such profound blackness. It seemed to suck the light from the canvas. Shapes writhed just beneath its impossible surface. Not fish, not eels, but elongated, multi-jointed shadows that hinted at forms his mind refused to fully process. And in the center, where the cottage should have been reflected, there was only a deeper darkness, an absence shaped vaguely like a vast, hunched figure, its form defined by the utter lack of light around it. Staring at it made the thrumming intensify, vibrating his skull panic, cold and sharp. Finally pierced Eris's scholarly detachment. He packed a single bag, his movements frantic. He needed to leave. Now, he threw open the front door. Instead of the overgrown path leading to his car, he faced the mirror. The water stretched right up to the doorstep, black and utterly still. The familiar landmarks, the gnarled willow, the old stone marker, were gone. Mist curled over the water's surface, thick and sluggish. The thrumming was a physical pressure now, a bass note resonating through the cottage, the ground, the air itself. He slammed the door, locking it with trembling hands. He ran to the back door. Same view, the endless, placid black water meeting the cottage walls. The windows showed only the same impenetrable, mist-shrouded mirror. Blackwater Cottage was now an island in an impossible sea. The lights flickered, then died completely. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It was alive. It pressed in, thick and cold, carrying that metallic stench. Eris fumbled for his torch. Its beam cut a feeble swat, illuminating dust motes dancing like agitated insects. He swung it towards the window. His reflection was gone. In its place, the glass seemed to ripple like the surface of dark water. Shapes moved within it, the same elongated, jointed shadows from Prentice's painting. They didn't press against the glass. They flowed within its substance. Wet, sliding sound came from the hallway. Not footsteps. Something heavy, dragging itself slowly over the damp floorboards. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It paused outside the study door. Eris held his breath, the torch beam shaking violently. The doorknob began to turn slowly. Silently he backed away, towards the fireplace, towards the hidden painting. His foot caught on the rug. He stumbled, his hand slapping against the cold stone of the hearth. The vibration was strongest here. He could feel it humming up his arm. The dragging sound resumed, just beyond the door now. A smell of stagnant water and deep, ancient mud filled the room. Overpowering the copper, Tanghi looked up at the painting. It was different. The abyss was closer, the hunched absence larger, The writhing shapes beneath the surface were clearer now. More defined skeletal limbs fused with tendrils. Eyeless heads that turned towards him, and the darkness where the cottage should be it was pulsing, slowly, in time, with the thrumming the dragging sound stopped. Right outside the study door, silence descended, heavier and more profound than any before. It wasn't empty. It was watchful. Eris understood, with a clarity that was worse than any scream. Prentice hadn't he been driven mad by isolation? He'd he been made aware of the thing that lived in the gaps, the silences, the slow erosion of stone and time, the deepening wasn't-he invading the cottage, the land he himself were dissolving into it. He was not being hunted. He was being incorporated. The misplaced objects, the distorted reflections, the warped geometry, they weren't attacks. They were symptoms. The boundaries were dissolving. The deepening wasn't entering his world. His world was becoming part of the deepening the door. Didn't he open? It simply wasn't there anymore. The wall where it had been was smooth, seamless stone, slick with condensation that reflected no light. The dragging sound started again. But now it was inside the room, coming from the corner where the shadows were deepest. Eris swung the torch beam. It illuminated nothing but the converging walls and the floorboards, which now looked less like wood and more like wet. Compressed Pete turned the beam back to the painting. The hunched absence filled the canvas. The writhing shapes were gone. In their place, faint but unmistakable in the abyssal black water, was the dim, terrified reflection of a man holding a shaking torch. His reflection, trapped within the painting, trapped within the deepening, the thrumming, reached a crescendo, vibrating his very molecules. The coppery smell vanished, replaced by the overwhelming scent of deep, cold mud, and something impossibly ancient and alien. The dragging sound was inches away now. Eris closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in a futile attempt to unsee the truth. He felt it then. Not a touch, but an envelopment, a coldness that wasn't temperature, but the absence of energy, of life. It wasn't pain. It was unmaking, a slow, inevitable dissolution, like ink dispersing in water. His thoughts fragmented. The torch slipped from numb fingers, its beam guttering out on the floorboards that were no longer boards, but something soft, yielding, and infinitely deep. The last thing Eris Thorne perceived, before perception itself dissolved, was the silence, not the held breath of the cottage, but the true, eternal silence of the abyss. The silence was the deepening, and it was finally, completely, full. He wasn't escaping. He was becoming part of the feast, and the terrible revelation echoing in the vanishing fragments of his mind was that the hunger he felt wasn't his own. It was the hunger of the thing that now contained him. The deepening was eternal, and it was always hungry, and he was just another morsel, dissolving slowly into the endless, silent dark, the cottage, the fen, the world beyond. They were simply next. Story 4. The rain hadn't stopped for 17 days. It wasn't the violent, thunderous kind, but a relentless, gray drizzle that seeped into the bones of Havenwood and turned the world into a watercolor nightmare. It was this sodden misery that brought Eleanor Vance, reeling from a messy divorce and the hollow ache of a life derailed, to the imposing, ivy-choked bulk of Blackwood House. It was cheap, isolated, and offered the numb oblivion she craved. A fresh start, she told herself, ignoring the damp chill that clung to the air the moment she turned the heavy, rusted key. Blackwood wasn't just old. It felt antediluvian, its gray stone walls, slick with moisture and clinging moss, seemed to absorb the feeble light rather than reflect it. The windows were deep set, hooded eyes watching the perpetually mist-shrouded valley below. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of wet stone, decaying wood, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old pennies left in the rain. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light that managed to penetrate the grime-streaked panes, illuminating swirling patterns. In the gloom, the first few days were merely unsettling. Eleanor chalked it up to the house's age and her own fragile state. The sheer silence was oppressive, not the comforting quiet of solitude, but a dense, watchful stillness that pressed in on her ears. Then came the whispers, not words exactly, more like the susurration of dry leaves skittering across stone, or the faint, rhythmic click-click-click of insect mandibles, always just beyond the edge of hearing. She'd turn, heart leaping into her throat, to find only empty corridors and the oppressive silence rushing back. Then the shadows began to move, not the natural shifting caused by the weak sun filtering through rain-lashed windows, but deliberate, liquid motions at the periphery of her vision. A dark shape would detach itself from the deeper gloom of a doorway and slide along the wall like spilled ink, vanishing the instant she focused on it. Cold spots bloomed unexpectedly, pockets of air so frigid they made her teeth ache. Even near the struggling fire in the cavernous hearth, Eleanor tried to rationalize. Drafts, settling timbers, stress. But the dread was a physical thing now, a cold serpent coiling in her gut. She started noticing the details she initially dismissed. The intricate, swirling carvings on the dark wood paneling, wherein T floral or geometric. Closer inspection revealed disturbing, abstract shapes that suggested impossible angles and grasping limbs. The faded wallpaper in the master bedroom, peeling at the edges, revealed layers beneath older patterns that seemed to depict writhing, half-formed figures in agony, swallowed by spiraling vortices one rain-slicked afternoon. While trying to chase the damp from the library, she found a hidden compartment in the base of an ancient, scarred desk. Inside, wrapped in brittle oilcloth, was a crumbling journal. The ink was faded brown, the handwriting spidery and frantic. It belonged to a previous occupant, a reclusive scholar named Alistair Thorne, dated over a century prior, October 12th. The whispers grow louder, not in the ears, but in the mind. It speaks without language, a pressure, an insistence. October 19th. The colded is not of this earth. It seeps from the foundation stones. I feel it watching from the cellar. It is not a presence, an absence that hungers. October 25th. The patterns, they are not decoration. They are a cage, or perhaps a lure. It is ancient, older than stone. It slumbers beneath. It dreams, and its dreams bleed into this place. November 1st. It knows my name now. It speaks it with the sound of grinding teeth. The shadows, they have teeth too. I see them in the corner of my eye. Sharp, too many. Escape is folly. The valley, the rain, it binds us. We are within its dreaming. Flesh reading, Thorn S. terrified scrawl, was like swallowing ice. A leaner S. rationalizations shattered. The whispers, wherein T. her imagination. The moving shadows, wherein T. tricks of the light. Something was here. Something buried deep beneath Blackwood House, older than the hills themselves, an entity that defied understanding, that existed in angles perpendicular to reality, whose mere dreaming presence warped the fabric of the place. The manifestations escalated, shedding all subtlety. The click, click, click became a constant, maddening counterpoint to the drumming rain, seeming to emanate from the very walls. The cold spots intensified, becoming glacial voids that sucked the warmth and breath from her lungs. Objects began to move. A heavy candlestick would be found on the floor across the room. Her reflection in the tarnished hallway mirror would sometimes lag, its eyes wide with terror, a fraction of a second after hers. One night, waking from a nightmare of drowning in thick, dark liquid, she found deep, muddy footprints leading from her bed to the bedroom door, and then simply vanishing halfway across the worn rug. The worst was the cellar. The heavy oak door, warped and swollen with damp, seemed to exhale a breath of pure, ancient decay. The stairs descended into utter blackness, a darkness that felt thick, alive. She never went down there, but she heard things, wet, dragging sounds, a low, resonant thrumming that vibrated in her molars, and once, a sound like a vast, stony inhalation from the depths of the valley itself seemed to conspire against her. The rain never ceased, turning the dirt track leading away into a treacherous river of mud. Her car, parked outside, refused to start, the engine clicking uselessly. Her phone lost all signal. The few distant lights of Havenwood Village, glimpsed through the mist on clear nights, seemed impossibly far away, unreachable islands in a sea of hungry dark. Thorn-s words echoed. Escape is folly. The valley, the rain, it binds us a cage, a lure. She was caught in the dream flesh of something vast, and terrible paranoia became her constant companion. Sleep was a battleground invaded by fragmented nightmares. Visions of impossible geometries, of stone teeth grinding beneath the earth, of being slowly dissolved into the cold, wet stone of the house. She saw glimpses in her waking hours, 2 fleeting impressions in the patterns of the rain on the window, coalescing into monstrous, multi-limbed silhouettes. The air grew heavier, tasting of ozone and grave soil. The whispers coalesced into a single, insistent pressure at the base of her skull. Stay, become, feed. One evening, driven by a desperate need for proof, she wasn't losing her mind. Eleanor gathered her courage and a flickering oil lamp. She approached the cellar door. The cold radiating from it was intense, making her joints stiff. The click, click, click was deafening now, synchronized with a deep, subterranean pulse. She could feel through the soles of her feet. She placed her hand on the swollen wood. It felt warm, and beneath her palm she felt a slow, rhythmic thump. Like a heartbeat, terror seized her, cold and absolute. She stumbled back, the lamp casting frantic, leaping shadows as she retreated down the hall. The weak light caught a framed photograph on the wall she passed 100 times, an old, sepia-toned picture of the original Blackwood family. She never really looked closely. Now, she did. The family stood stiffly, unsmiling. The parents, 2 children, but her eyes were drawn to the background, to the deep-set window of the very room she now used. There, pressed against the glass from the inside, was a shape. It was indistinct, a smudge of deeper darkness, but it had too many limbs, folded at impossible angles, and where a face should be, there was only a cluster of dark, sharp points. Teeth choked sob escaped her. This wasn't just happening now. It had always been here, woven into the fabric of Blackwood. The entity wasn't just beneath the house. It was the house. It was the valley. It was the rain. It was the dreaming hunger that had drawn her here. A moth to a cold, dead flame. The revelation didn't bring clarity, only a deeper, suffocating despair. Escape was impossible. She was inside its body, its dreaming mind, the whispers whereunto just in her head. They were the slow digestion of her sanity by something vast and ancient that night. The storm broke with unnatural fury. Thunder shook the old stones, not with a boom, but with a deep, guttural roar that sounded disturbingly organic. Lightning, not white, but a sickly, bruised purple, illuminated the valley in strobing flashes. In those brief, horrifying instants, Alina saw the truth outside her window. The hills were hills. They were the hunched, sleeping backs of colossal, stony entities, half buried in the earth. The rain wasn't rain. It was a viscous, dark fluid weeping from the sky, and the valley floor it pulsed, like the throat of a gargantuan beast. The cellar door blew open with a sound like tearing sinew, not from the wind. It was pushed from within. Darkness, thicker and blacker than any natural shadow, poured up the stairs. It didn't flow. It unfolded, revealing glimpses of impossible angles and glistening, chitinous surfaces that defied focus. The click, click, click became a deafening chorus. 1,000 tiny jaws snapping in the void. The cold intensified, stealing her breath, frosting the air in front of her face. It filled the hallway. This absence given form, it had no distinct shape, only a shifting, coalescing nightmare of sharp edges and liquid shadow. And within that seething darkness, eyes opened, not two, dozens, glowing with a cold, ancient malice that held the weight of epochs. They fixed on Alina, pinning her in place, not with fear, but with a terrible, undeniable recognition. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The knowledge slammed into her mind, cold and final, as intimate as her own thoughts. She hadn't stumbled upon its dream. She was its dream, a fleeting thought, a morsel of consciousness drawn into its vast, slumbering mind. And now the dreamer was stirring. Hungry, the entity flowed towards her, silent save for the clicking chorus and the crushing pressure in her skull. The walls seemed to lean in, the patterns on the wood writhing with obscene life. There was nowhere to run. The valley held her. The house held her. The ancient, unknowable thing beneath held her. Its shadow fell upon her, colder than the grave smelling of wet stone and cosmic decay. The last thing Alina Vance saw before the darkness swallowed her whole wasn't teeth or claws, but her own face reflected in one of those countless ancient eyes, twisted, terrified, and already beginning to blur at the edges, dissolving into the entity dreaming. Hunger, the rain continued to fall on Blackwood House. It seeped into the ancient stones, fed the clinging ivy, and filled the valley with its soft, relentless drumming. Inside, the silence returned, a deeper silence now, a satisfied silence. The only movement was the slow, deliberate shifting of shadows in the empty hall, coalescing briefly into a familiar, feminine silhouette near the cellar door, before dissolving back into the hungry dark. The dream had consumed its morsel, and somewhere, deep beneath the roots of the world, something vast and ancient shifted in its slumber, its hunger momentarily sated, waiting for the next lonely soul to seek refuge within its dreaming flesh. Story 5. The salt-stung air of Crow S. Point had always carried a melancholic weight, a legacy whispered in the creak of abandoned fishing boats, and the skeletal remains of houses clinging to the wind-lashed cliffs. Professor Aris Thorne, a man whose life was measured in dusty manuscripts and forgotten dialects, had come seeking the unrecorded history buried beneath this desolation. He de-rented the only habitable structure, the old lighthouse keeper S. cottage, perched precariously at the peninsula S tip, its whitewash peeling like sunburnt skin. The unease began subtly, almost dismissible. It started with the drafts, not the usual Atlantic gales rattling the ill-fitted windows, but cold, localized breaths that seemed to originate inside the thick stone walls. Aris would be hunched over his notes, translating fragmented local lore about the thrice-drowned village, when a pocket of air, unnaturally frigid and smelling faintly of wet stone, and something metallic like old blood, would brush his neck. He'd shiver, glance around the dimly lit room, and blame. The cottage S.H. Then came the silences. Crow S. Point was never truly quiet. The crash of waves, the shriek of gulls, the wind's constant moan, they formed a chaotic symphony. But sometimes, abruptly, all sound would cease, not a lull, but a complete vacuum, as if the air itself had solidified. In these profound silences, Aris would become hyper-aware of his own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the oppressive stillness. He'd strain to hear anything, and sometimes he'd catch it, a faint, dry scraping, like fingernails dragging slowly across plaster, emanating from within the walls behind him, turning, heart-hammering. He'd find only the rough, damp stone, silent once more as the normal sounds rushed back in, leaving him shaken. His research fueled the dread. The villagers hadn't just abandoned Crow S. Point. They'd fled in terror centuries ago, leaving cryptic warnings carved into beams and stones. He waits behind the wall. The tide brings him closer. Listen to the silence. Eris, a rationalist at heart, initially dismissed them as superstitious fear of storms or disease, but the manifestations grew bolder one evening. Poring over a water-stained journal found beneath a loose floorboard the frantic scribbles of Elias Crane. The last lighthouse keeper Eris felt a distinct pressure against his back. It wasn't a shove, but a steady, insistent leaning, as if someone stood directly behind him, their chest pressing against his spine. He whirled around, knocking his chair over. The room was empty, yet the chill lingered, and the smell of wet stone and iron was stronger than ever. He noticed, for the first time, how the lamplight seemed to recoil from the corners, leaving pools of unnaturally deep shadow that pulsed subtly, like breathing. The journal entries became increasingly fragmented, filled with terrified ramblings. It whispers in the stones, not words, shapes, angles, that hurt the mind saw it in the glass reflection. Wrong, too many teeth. The walls are thin here, thinner. Every tide Elias Crane had vanished without a trace. Eris began to see things. Out of the corner of his eye, the shadows would coalesce into impossible geometries, jagged lines that defied perspective, hinting at shapes that strained his sanity. Reflections in the grimy window pane would show the room behind him subtly altered. A doorway where there was only wall, or the suggestion of a hunched, elongated figure standing just beyond his peripheral vision. When he turned, it was always gone, leaving only the mundane, decaying cottage. The sense of being watched became a constant, suffocating presence. He decided to leave. Packing his meager belongings, his hands trembled. The tide was high. The single treacherous road connecting Crow S Point to the mainland submerged. He was trapped until dawn, as twilight bled into a moonless, starless night. The true horror escalated. The scraping inside the walls became frantic. A desperate clawing from multiple points simultaneously. The cold drafts coalesced into localized frost patterns, blooming on the stonework, intricate and alien, forming spirals that seemed to pull his gaze into their impossible depths. Whispers began, not in his ears, but inside his skull, a susurrus of dry leaves and grinding stone, forming half-glimpsed concepts that bypassed language and resonated with primal terror. Confinement, hunger, antiquity, waiting. Panic seized him. He barricaded the door, piled furniture against the inner walls, clutching Elias Crane's journal like a talisman. He read the final, barely coherent entry. It is not behind the wall, it is the wall, the space between, the silence before the scream. It feeds on time, on isolation, on the fear that blooms when you realize there is no outside, only the inside. The cottage groaned, not from the wind, but from within its own structure. The stones seemed to shift minutely, the angles of the room subtly warping. The floorboards buckled upwards in one corner, revealing not earth, but an impossible, lightless void that smelled of the deep ocean trench and decay. From that darkness, something pale and segmented, like the jointed leg of an enormous, petrified insect, slowly emerged. Probing the air with blind sensitivity, Eris screamed, scrambling back until he hit the opposite wall. It felt yielding, strangely porous. He looked down, the journal in his hands, the ink, wasn tea, just faded. It was moving. The frantic words Elias had penned centuries ago were slowly rearranging themselves on the page, forming new, impossible sentences written in a script that hurt his eyes to follow. It spoke of him, of Eris Thorne. It described his arrival, his research, his mounting terror, and it described what came next. He understood then. Escape wasn't tea, just impossible. It was a meaningless concept. The entity wasn't tea confined within Crow S. Point. Crow S. Point, the cottage, the very air he breathed, had become its manifestation. He was already inside it, the ancient, unknowable thing, the presence that dwelled in the spaces between realities, that fed on the despair of trapped minds, and the erosion of time had folded this place into itself. The subtle manifestations, the whispers, the warping space, they weren't tea intrusions. They were the entity becoming aware of the morsel caught within its vast. Timeless self the scraping stopped. The whispers ceased. The probing limb withdrew into the void beneath the floorboards, which sealed over seamlessly. An unnatural stillness descended, thicker and heavier than any silence before. The lamplight guttered, casting long, distorted shadows that no longer obeyed the laws of physics. They stretched towards him, not across the floor, but through the air, tendrils of pure darkness reaching with patient, inevitable intent. Eris Thorne, huddled against the wall that was no longer stone, but something cold and yielding, like the membrane of a colossal, slumbering beast. He felt the vibration through it, a slow, ponderous rhythm, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, but infinitely older and colder. It was the pulse of the entity. He was not just trapped within its domain. He was pressed against its living flesh. Outside, the relentless Atlantic roared, but the sound felt distant, unimportant. The only reality was the crushing pressure of the inside. He looked at the journal in his trembling hands. The rearranged script now formed a single, looping phrase, glowing faintly with an internal, sickly light. It wasn't a warning. It was an inscription, a name, his name, and beneath it, the chilling certainty etched itself into his crumbling mind. There is no dawn here, only the endless tide, and what the tide brings. The cold deepened, the shadows thickened, the heartbeat against his back grew louder. Eris Thorn closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in the futile hope that blindness might spare him the sight of what form the entity would finally take when it decided to notice him properly. The scraping started again, not in the walls this time, but seemingly from all directions at once, and frighteningly close. The tide was coming in. Story 6. The wallpaper in Mother S. old bedroom had always breathed. I told myself it was the house settling, the way old bones groan when the wind turns cold. But after the funeral, after the last casserole dish was returned, and the neighbors stopped their pitying glances, the breathing grew louder. It wasn't he just in her room anymore. It slithered down the hallway, under my door at night, a wet, rhythmic rasp that made my own breath hitch in sympathy, or Defiance ID, inherited the Victorian monstrosity on Willow Street. All its gabled shadows and dust-choked memories, Mother S. dementia had been a slow unraveling, her mind fraying like the lace curtains she refused to replace. Now, alone in the silence she left behind, I wondered if madness was contagious, hereditary, a spore in the air, waiting for fresh lungs. It started with reflections. I catch my face in the tarnished hall mirror pale, hollow-eyed, 32, and already feeling ancient. And for a split second, the eyes wherein mine, they be wider, darker, the pupils swallowing the irises whole. Then I blink, and it would be me again, just Evelyn Harper, trying to remember if she'd taken her antidepressants then. Came the whispers, not words, not at first, just sighs against my ear when no one was there, the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the attic floor, directly above my head. I freeze, coffee cup trembling in my hand, straining to hear. Silence would answer, always silence, but the air would thicken, tasting of wet earth and something metallic, like old blood paranoia took root. I stopped answering the phone. The cheerful ringtone felt like an assault, a demand to pretend everything was fine. I drew every curtain, locking out the accusing sunlight. The mail piled up, unopened. Bills, sympathy cards, flyers, all potential carriers of some invisible contamination. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, left zucchini bread on the porch. I let it rot there, convinced she laced it with something. Her kind eyes, seen through the peephole, seemed full of secrets. Did she know? Did she hear the breathing too? The worst was the sense of being watched. Not just watched, studied. It followed me from room to room. A cold pressure between my shoulder blades. ID whirl around, heart hammering, expecting what? A shape, a face. There was only ever the empty gloom. The familiar furniture draped in sheets, like shrouded ghosts, yet the feeling intensified. A physical weight making my skin prickle. I started sleeping with the lights on. A butcher knife under my pillow. Rationality screamed it was grief, isolation. The house playing tricks. But another voice, thin and desperate, whispered, "They re-coming back. They remember. They." The word echoed from a locked room in my mind. Childhood, a blur of sun-drenched lawns and shrieking laughter, then shadows, darker shadows. My sister, Leela, 7 years old, golden curls, missing since that sweltering August day when I was 10. They dragged the pond, searched the woods. Mother had collapsed, wailing. Father drank himself into the grave within a year. I'd been questioned. Had I seen anything, heard anything? ID shaken my head. Mute with a terror eye, couldn't he name? The official story became a tragic accident, a wander into the woods. But Mother, even in her clearer moments, would look at me with a hollowed-out stare and murmur, "You were playing that game again. Where NTU the game." That's where the cracks truly began to show. Fragments surfaced, sharp as broken glass. Leela and me, giggling in the musty attic. A chalk circle drawn on the floorboards. A rhyme chanted, words pulled from some half-remembered storybook. Shadow friend, shadow kin, let the watcher come on in. We thought it was funny. Pretend. Like summoning imaginary friends. But after we chanted it, the attic grew cold. The single bulb flickered, and Leela had stopped laughing. She pointed a trembling finger towards the darkest corner. "Evie," she whispered, her voice small and tight. "Who s that lady? I seen nothing. Just shifting dust motes." I told her she was being silly. We gone downstairs for lemonade. 3 days later, Leela vanished for 22 years. I buried that memory. Now, the house was dredging it up. The whispers began forming words. Evie play the game they slithered from air vents. Rustled behind the wallpaper, floral patterns. My reflection in the mirror started changing more frequently. Sometimes it was me, older, haggard. Sometimes it was Leela, her face pale and pleading. Once, horrifyingly, it was Mother in her final days. Eyes clouded, mouth slack. Whispering soundlessly sleep became impossible. When I did drift, nightmares held me captive. Leela lost in endless, twisting hallways within the house, calling my name, the shadowy figure from the attic corner, a tall, impossibly thin woman with no face, just a dark smear where features should be reaching out with long, bone-white fingers, and always the sound of something heavy being dragged. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. Right above me, I became obsessed with the attic. The sealed door at the end of the upstairs hall felt like a beating heart, pulsing with the house's dark rhythm. Mother had nailed it shut after Leela disappeared. For safety, she said, her voice tight. Now, the nails seemed to groan in the wood. One rainy Tuesday, the whispering crescendoed into a shriek inside my skull. Let me out, I broke, armed with a rusted crowbar I found in the cellar. I attacked the door. Splinters flew. Ancient nails shrieked as they yielded. The wood gave way with a final rotten crack, and the door swung inward. On groaning hinges the smell hit me first. Not dust and decay, but ozone and wet stone, and beneath it, that coppery tang of blood. The attic was impossibly vast, stretching further back than the house's dimensions allowed. Moonlight from a grimy window illuminated swirling dust motes, and there, in the center of the floorboards, was the chalk circle Leela and I had drawn. Faint, but unmistakable. Inside it lay a single, small white sneaker, impossibly pristine after 2 decades. Leela's sneaker my breath caught. This wasn't memory. This was here, now. The air thickened, turning gelid. The whispering coalesced into a single, familiar voice, thin and brittle as dried leaves. Mother's voice. You invited her, Evelyn. You called the watcher. You thought it was a gay my spun around, crowbar raised. Nothing, just the oppressive gloom. Then, movement flickered at the edge of vision. In the deepest corner, where Leela had pointed, the shadows thickened. They pulled inwards, coalescing into a tall, impossibly slender silhouette. No face, just a void darker than the surrounding blackness. It didn't move towards me. It simply unfolded. One long, white hand emerged, skeletal fingers pointing not at me, but at the wall beside the attic door. I followed the gesture. The wallpaper there was peeling. Beneath it, something was scratched into the plaster. Deep, frantic gouges. Not words. A sequence of vertical lines grouped in 4s, then 5s, then back to 4s, like tallies. My heart stopped. I remembered Mother, in her lucid moments, obsessively counting things. Her pills, the steps on the stairs, the tiles on the bathroom floor. Counting keeps them away, she muttered once, her eyes darting fearfully towards the ceiling. The watcher counts too. But backwards the implication slammed into me, cold and brutal. Mother hadn't nailed the attic shut just for safety. she'd been locking something in, or trying to. The tallies, were they hers? Counting the days, the hours, or were they the watcher S? Marking what? Victims, moments of intrusion. The shadow figure shifted. The air pressure dropped, making my ears pop. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, resonating in my bones. The whispering returned. But now it was layered Mother S. broken lamentations, Leela S. terrified whimpers, and beneath it all, a dry, papery rustle that might have been language, might have been madness. She counted, she tried, but the door was opened, the circle remains. The watcher S. hand extended further, impossibly long, towards the chalk circle on the floor, towards Leela S. sneaker. The finger, bone white and jointed like an insect S. leg, hovered over it. Then it slowly, deliberately, pointed at me. The revelation wasn't a memory. It was an avalanche. Leela hadn't wandered off. She hadn't fallen into the pond. The game wasn't pretend. I had invited the watcher. That day in the attic, when Leela saw her, and I dismissed it. I had sealed my sister S. fate. The watcher took what was offered, what was invited. Mother knew. She'd spent years trying to contain it. Counting, sealing, descending into dementia, fueled by the impossible horror living in her attic. And now it was free again, because I had opened the door, again the boundary between delusion and reality. Didn't just blur, it shattered. Was the watcher a psychic scar, a manifestation of crushing guilt given monstrous form? Or was it an ancient, hungry thing that lived in the spaces between walls and minds, drawn by childish invocation and fed by grief? The question ceased to matter. The terror was absolute. The shadow figure took a silent step forward. Its form seemed to bleed into the surrounding darkness, becoming less a shape and more a chilling absence of light. A hole in the world eye stumbled back, tripping over the splintered doorframe. The crowbar clattered from my numb fingers. The whispering rose to a cacophony. Inside my skull mother sobbing, Leela screaming my name. The watcher S. dry, rustling count. 4, 3, 2. I scrambled down the stairs on hands and knees. The house itself seeming to tilt and writhe around me. Wallpaper patterns swirled like trapped insects. The breathing in the walls became a guttural roar. I crashed into the front hall, fumbling with deadbolts slick, with my own cold sweat. Freedom was just beyond the heavy oak door. Sunlight, Mrs. Gable S. overgrown petunias my hand, froze on the final lock. Behind me, on the staircase, a single, distinct sound cut through the chaos. Not a whisper, not a scrape. The light, hesitant tread of a child S. bare feet on wood. and a small, trembling voice, heartbreakingly familiar. Evie, I am scared. Where did the lady go I turned? The hallway was empty, utterly still. The breathing had stopped. The whispers silenced. Dust motes drifted peacefully in a shaft of weak light from the landing window. Silence. Profound, deafening, silence-a hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. Delusion. It had to be. A nervous breakdown. Grief and guilt and isolation finally snapping the tether. Relief, cold and shaky, washed over me. I just needed air. Sunlight. I turned back to the door. My trembling fingers finally finding purchase on the deadbolt as it clicked open. A frigid breath touched the back of my neck. Not air from outside. It was the cold of deep earth, of forgotten places, and a voice, so close it felt like spiders crawling inside my ear canal, whispered just one word. Not Mother S. voice, not Leela S. A voice like dry leaves scraping over stone. One the door swung open onto an ordinary, sun-dappled porch. Mrs. Gable S. cat blinked lazily from the fence, but I didn't step out. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the worn welcome mat, because etched into the wood of the doorframe, just beside the lock, where no mark had been before, were 4 fresh, deep gouges, 4 vertical lines. A tally the silence pressed in, heavier than any sound. It wasn't peace. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting, counting down, and somewhere deep inside the house, where the shadows pooled thickest, the game was far from over. The circle remained. The door was open, and the watcher always collected what was promised. Story 7. The rain lashed against the train window like frantic fingers trying to claw their way in. Dr. Eleanor Vance watched the blurred landscape of the Scottish Highland streak, past jagged peaks, swallowed by low, bruised clouds, valleys choked with ancient pines that seemed to lean inward, conspiring. She clutched the brittle telegram in her coat pocket. Blackwood Estate requires your expertise. Urgent, generous compensation. Discretion paramount. A Blackwood Eleanor, a historian specializing in pre-Celtic artifacts, recognized the name. The Blackwoods were reclusive. Their estate a decaying monument, rumored to sit atop something older than the stones themselves. Arrival felt less like a destination and more like an intrusion. Blackwood Manor hunched against the storm, a hulking silhouette of gray stone swallowed by ivy, as thick as serpents. No lights welcomed her. Only a single, crooked chimney spewed smoke into the twilight. The air tasted of wet earth and something else metallic, like old blood or rust on forgotten iron. The door groaned open before she could knock, revealing Alistair Blackwood. He was gaunt, parchment pale, his eyes sunken pools reflecting a weariness that seemed centuries deep. He offered no smile, only a curt nod. "Dr. Vance, come. The library is Drythe Manor S interior was a tomb draped in dust sheets. Cold seeped from the flagstones through a leaner S boots. Alistair led her through cavernous rooms filled with shrouded furniture, their shapes indistinct and vaguely menacing in the gloom. The air grew colder as they descended narrow servant stairs, the walls pressing close, slick, with condensation that smelled faintly of brine. The collection, Alistair rasped, gesturing towards a heavy oak door banded in iron, is below. It requires contextual understanding. The sub-basement library was a vault. Stale air, thick as velvet, carried the scent of crumbling vellum, and something unsettlingly organic, like damp mushrooms growing in a crypt. Alistair lit oil lamps, their flickering light revealing walls lined with books bound in cracked leather and strange, dark wood. But it was the centerpiece that arrested Alina. A stone plinth holding a collection of artifacts unlike any she'd seen, not tools or ornaments, but objects of deliberate alien wrongness. A blade carved from black basalt, its edge unnaturally sharp, humming with a subsonic vibration she felt in her molars. A circlet of twisted silver that seemed to writhe in the lamplight, and a tablet roughly hewn, covered in spiraling glyphs that hurt her eyes to focus on. They seemed to shift, to squirm. "These," Alistair whispered, his voice dry as dead leaves, "are not of man. They are the leavings, the echoes." He pointed a trembling finger at the glyphs. "They speak of the watcher below, the sleeper in the stone Alina." S. scholarly skepticism warred with a primal unease. The glyphs defied known languages, yet patterns emerged, depictions of vast, amorphous shapes pressing against a thin barrier, of figures dissolving into screaming smoke. "A local myth?" she asked, trying to sound detached. Alistair's laugh was a brittle crack. "No myth, Doctor. It is. It was here before the mountains rose, before life crawled from the deeps. It slumbers beneath us, dreaming in the dark." He touched the stone plinth. "This house, this very rock, is its anchor, its prison, and its window." The first manifestations were subtle. Alina, working late translating the maddening glyphs, heard it. A faint, rhythmic thump, 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 like a giant, slow heartbeat resonating up through the stone floor. The oil lamps would gutter wildly without draft. Shadows in the corners of the library seemed thicker, hungrier, swallowing the light. One night, she saw her reflection in the polished basalt blade, but it was distorted, stretched, and for a terrifying instant, something vast and multi-limbed seemed to move behind her. Image sleep offered no respite. Dreams were suffocating labyrinths of stone corridors that pulsed with that same heartbeat. She felt unseen eyes upon her, cold and ancient, studying her with the detached curiosity of something examining an insect. She'd awake gasping, the metallic taste strong in her mouth, convinced she'd heard whispers, not words, but sounds like stone grinding on stone, or the wet shifting of immense, unseen bodies. The subtly shattered one rain-lashed midnight. A leaner, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name, returned to the library. The air was frigid, thick with the scent of ozone and decay. The glyphs on the tablet glowed with a sickly, internal phosphorescence as she watched, horrified. The stone plinth bled. Dark, viscous fluid seeped from its pores, pooling on the floor, smelling of copper and deep-sea trenches. The heartbeat sound was deafening now, a physical pressure in her chest. The shadows coalesced. They weren't just dark. They were solid, forming impossible geometries that hurt the mind, angles that couldn't exist, depths that defied perspective. Within those shifting darknesses, she glimpsed fragments. A colossal, segmented limb ending in hooked barbs. A cluster of lidless eyes reflecting the dim light with alien intelligence. A maw lined with crystalline teeth that seemed to fracture the very light around it. The watcher below wasn't a creature. It was a concept made manifest, a reality-warping malignancy, older than time panic, seized her. She fled the library, stumbling up the stairs. The manor had changed. The corridors she knew were gone, replaced by identical, endless stone passages, lit by flickering, sourceless green light. The heartbeat followed her, pounding in her skull. Doors she tried were either locked or opened onto bricked-up walls, or sheer drops into fathomless blackness. Whispers filled the air now, layered over the grinding, and the wet shifting, sounds voices speaking in tongues that scraped her sanity, promising dissolution, unity with the infinite dark. Beneath the stone she found Alistair in the grand hall. He stood before a massive, empty fireplace, carved with the same spiraling glyphs. He turned, and Alina recoiled. His eyes were gone, replaced by pits of swirling, ink-eye darkness. His skin was translucent, revealing pulsing veins of the same black fluid that had bled from the plinth. He smiled, a rictus that split his face unnaturally wide. "It wakes," he breathed, his voice layered with the grinding whispers. "It tastes your fear, Dr. Vance. Such a rare vintage. You thought you were studying the echoes. You are the echo now. The house is its dream. We are its thoughts. He gestured upwards. Elinor looked. The high ceiling wasn't stone anymore. It was a vast, translucent membrane, like the belly of some cosmic beast. Beyond it, pressed against the thin barrier, was it? Indescribable, a shifting mass of impossible biology and non-Euclidean geometry eyes, limbs, maws, crystalline structures, all flowing and merging in a nightmare ballet. It dwarfed the house, dwarfed the mountain. Its presence was a physical weight, crushing her spirit, a psychic scream of alien hunger and ancient, indifferent malice. The membrane bulged downwards, strained by the sheer pressure of its attention. "You cannot run," Alistair whispered, his body beginning to liquefy, flowing towards the glyphs on the fireplace like wax. "The doors lead where it wills. The walls are it. You are already within its dream. You always were, from the moment the telegram called you." He dissolved into a stream of black ichor that seeped into the carvings, making them pulse with dark light. "Welcome home, Elinor." The sleeper hungers for new eyes. To see the world it will unmake. Elinor ran. Not for escape was a child's fantasy now, but from the crushing immensity pressing down from above, from the whispering stones, from the dissolving horror of her own reality. The corridors stretched and twisted. Doors mocked her. Windows showed only swirling, obsidian fog. The heartbeat was the world's pulse. The whispers were its voice. She stumbled into a small, forgotten chapel. Dusty pews faced an altar carved from the same black stone as the artifacts. Above it, instead of a crucifix, was a crude bas-relief of the watcher below. She sank to her knees, not in prayer, but in utter desolation. The air grew colder still. The heartbeat slowed, deepened, becoming a sound felt more in the bones than heard. The whispers coalesced into a single, vast, grinding voice that resonated within her skull, bypassing her ears entirely. See, her eyes were ripped open, not by force, but by a sudden, terrifying expansion of perception. She saw through the stones, through the earth. She saw the body of the sleeper, not a creature confined beneath the house, but an entity whose vastness encompassed the bedrock, the mountains, the very roots of the world. Blackwood Manor wasn't built over it. It was a mere pimple on its immeasurable hide. The artifacts weren't echoes, they were anchors, focal points for its dreaming attention. And she was a spark of awareness caught in the immensity of its slumbering mind. The horror wasn't just its existence. It was the sheer, annihilating scale of its indifference. Humanity was less than dust motes in a forgotten corner of its cosmic nightmare. The pressure built. The chapel walls began to sweat the same black ichor. The the bas-relief on the altar moved, the stone flowing like mud, forming a single, lidless eye that fixed her with a gaze of pure, alien void. It wasn't malice she saw. It was acknowledgement. The eye blinked. A slow, deliberate movement of shifting stone, and as it opened again, Eleanor Vance understood the final, inescapable truth with a clarity that shattered her last vestige of self. She wasn't trapped in the house. She was trapped inside the watcher. The black fluid welled up from the flagstones, thick and warm, climbing her legs. The heartbeat was her own. The whispers were her thoughts, unraveling into the ancient, crushing silence of the stone. The last human sound was a whimper, lost in the grinding sigh of the mountain settling, and the slow, satisfied closing of an eye carved from the bones of the world. The sleeper shifted in its ageless dream, cradling its new, tiny awareness within its infinite, stony dark. Outside, the rain fell on Blackwood Manor, silent and eternal, washing the windows clean of any trace of the world that once was. The house stood sentinel, a silent monument to the horror beneath, within, and all around, waiting, dreaming, forever. Story 8. The damp seeped into everything in Blackwater Falls. It clung to the cracked leather of Alara's suitcase as she hauled it up the sagging porch steps of the old Henderson place, and it hung heavy in the air, tasting of moss and forgotten things. The realtor, a gaunt man named Finch, whose eyes never quite met hers, had mumbled something about the river being high this spring. Alara, fleeing the suffocating noise and expense of the city, saw only potential. Wide floorboards begging for sanding, high ceilings perfect for her canvases, and a silence that promised focus the first week was a symphony of sawdust and sweat. Sunlight, weak but persistent, filtered through grimy windows as Alara stripped wallpaper layered like geological strata beneath the faded floral patterns and garish 70s swirls. She found older layers, a deep, unsettling burgundy that reminded her of dried blood. And beneath that, fragments of a strange, geometric pattern etched directly onto the plaster in a tarnished, metallic paint. She dismissed it as eccentric Victoriana. The house, however, had other plans. It began subtly, almost laughably. A tube of cadmium red oil paint, left uncapped overnight, hadn't dried out. Instead, it had spread, not leaked, but oozed in a perfect, impossibly thin circle across the drop cloth. The edges unnervingly sharp. Alara cleaned it up, blaming humidity. Then the clocks. The old grandfather clock in the hall, which she painstakingly wound, stopped dead at 3:17 am. The next night, her digital alarm clock blinked the same time, 3:17, for a full hour before resetting. A chill, unrelated to the pervasive damp, traced her spine. The silence deepened, not the peaceful quiet she craved, but an oppressive, watchful stillness. Sounds from outside, the distant bark of a dog, the rumble of a truck on the county road seemed muffled, as if heard through thick felt. Inside, the creaks and groans of the settling house took on a new quality. They weren't random. They were deliberate. A rhythmic tap-tap-tapping inside the bedroom wall, mimicking the pace of a slow heartbeat, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the attic floor, directly above her head. At precisely 3:17 a.m., when she climbed the rickety pull-down stairs, flashlight beam trembling, the attic was empty, thick with undisturbed dust. The dragging sound stopped the moment her foot touched the floorboards. The dreams started. Vivid, claustrophobic nightmares where the walls of the house pulsed like living tissue, and the geometric patterns she uncovered writhed beneath the plaster, forming symbols that hurt her eyes to look at. She wake gasping, convinced she heard whispering not words, but a susurrus of dry leaves and grinding stones, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations. The damp smell intensified, now carrying an undercurrent of loam, and something metallic, like old blood. Her art turned strange. Sketches intended as landscapes became distorted. Perspectives warped impossibly. Figures she drew seemed to have too many limbs, or eyes where eyes shouldn't be. One morning, she found a canvas she left blank the night before, smeared with a thick, oily substance, the color of tarnished bronze, the exact shade of the strange paint beneath the wallpaper. It smelled of wet earth and ozone. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle beneath her skin, desperate for human contact. Alara drove into the small town. The general store felt unnaturally quiet. Mrs. Gabe, the elderly proprietor, rang up Alara's groceries with trembling hands. Her gaze kept darting towards the window, facing the river road, towards the Henderson place. "Settlin' in, all right up at the old place, dear?" Mrs. Gabe asked, her voice brittle. "It's quiet." Alara managed. Mrs. Gable's eyes met hers, filled with a profound, weary sadness. "It's always quiet up there. Too quiet. My grandpappy, he helped build that house. Back when the Hendersons first came. Said they dug deep for the cellar. Too deep. Hit something old. Something that slept." She leaned closer, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint and decay. They filled it back in quick, sealed it with concrete. "But Grandpappy said you couldn't seal away hunger," said the ground remembers. The river remembers. She pushed Alara's change across the counter, her knuckles white. Folks say the Hendersons changed, got quiet, moved away sudden-like, years ago, left everything. Nobody stays long up there. The damp gets in. The drive back felt like traversing a tunnel. The trees lining the road seemed to press closer. Their branches, like skeletal fingers, scratching at the car's roof. The sky, previously overcast, had turned a sickly, bruised yellow. The damp air felt thick, resistant, as if she were pushing through water. Arriving home, the house seemed to loom. Its windows looked like darkened, watchful eyes that night. The escalation was undeniable. Alara sat in her makeshift studio, trying to sketch. The single lamp casting long, distorted shadows. The rhythmic tapping in the wall started again. Faster now, frantic. Then the light bulb dimmed, not flickered, but steadily faded, as if being drained, plunging the room into deep twilight. The temperature plummeted. Her breath fogged the air, and in the deepening gloom, the walls began to shift. Not physically, but the angles seemed wrong, the corners receding into impossible depths. The geometric patterns beneath the plaster glowed with a faint, sickly luminescence, pulsating slowly. The whispering sound returned, louder now. A dry chorus filling the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't Tia language. It was the sound of immense, ancient pressure, of stone grinding against stone in the deep, dark places of the earth. It spoke of epochs passing, of hunger that spanned millennia, of a consciousness vast and utterly alien, indifferent to humanity as ants beneath a boot. It was awake, and it knew she was there. Terror, pure and blinding, seized Alara. She bolted from the room, stumbling down the hallway towards the front door. Her hand closed on the cold brass knob. She twisted. It didn't budge. She threw her weight against it. Nothing. The windows were next. She grabbed a heavy candlestick, smashing it against the glass. It bounced off with a dull thud, leaving not a scratch. The glass wasn't tea glass anymore. It felt dense, rubbery, cold as deep earth. She hammered at it, screaming, until her hands were bruised and bloody. But it was like striking bedrock, though whispering, intensified, vibrating through the floorboards, up her legs, into her bones. It filled her skull, a pressure threatening to burst her eardrums. The walls weren't just shifting angles now. They were breathing, subtly, rhythmically expanding and contracting. The floorboards beneath her feet felt soft, yielding, like packed earth. The smell of loam and old blood was overpowering. Cloying, driven by primal fear, Alara turned towards the stairs. She had to get away, find another exit, the cellar, anything. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hallway above stretched before her, impossibly long, the end lost in shadow. She ran, her footsteps echoing dully. She ran past familiar doors, the bedroom, the bathroom, but they kept coming. Identical doors repeating into the gloom. She ran until her lungs burned, sweat stinging her eyes. But the end of the hallway never got closer. She looked back. The stairs she'd just ascended were gone. There was only more hallway stretching behind her. Identical doors receding into shadow. She was trapped in an impossible corridor. A loop of wood and plaster within her own home. The whispering was a roar now, filling the endless space, the geometric patterns on the walls glowing brighter, pulsing faster. Like the heartbeat of the earth itself, Alara sank to her knees on the unnaturally yielding floorboards, sobbing, the sound swallowed by the immense, ancient suzerainess. This wasn't haunting. This wasn't ghosts. This was something far older, vaster, and more fundamentally wrong. An entity that wasn't malevolent in the human sense, but whose mere presence, whose awakening consciousness, warped reality, consumed space and time like nutrients. It was the deep, dark hunger beneath the roots of the world, and she was an insignificant morsel caught in its awareness exhaustion, and despair finally claimed her. She slumped against the pulsating wall, the cold, damp plaster feeling like living skin. The whispering seemed to soften, not in volume, but in focus. It was concentrating. She felt a presence, vast and cold as interstellar space, turn its attention fully upon her, not with malice, but with the detached curiosity of a child, examining an insectae new sound, intruded, a faint cracking. She looked down, where her bloody palm rested against the wall. A thin, black fissure was opening in the plaster, not a crack in the wall, but a crack in reality itself. It was impossibly dark, a void deeper than any night, and it was widening, not quickly, but with the inevitability of continental drift. Cold air, smelling of deep caves and impossible ages, sighed out from it. Alara scrambled back, pressing herself against the opposite wall, which now felt disturbingly soft and warm. The crack continued to grow, silently splitting the hallway floor, creeping up the walls. Through the fissure, she didn't see darkness. She saw movement, vast, indistinct shapes shifting in impossible geometries, silhouetted against a light that wasn't light, but a profound absence of it. She saw things that defied description angles, that folded in on themselves, surfaces that were simultaneously near and infinitely far away. It was the glimpse behind the curtain of her reality. The terrifying truth of the entities domain, the whispering, coalesced into a single, crushing pressure in her mind. A thought not her own. Here, it wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a declaration of presence. The crack wasn't an escape route. It was an entrance, a breach. The entity wasn't confined to the cellar anymore. It was here, bleeding through the fabric of the house. Of her world, Alara closed her eyes, pressing her hands over her ears. A futile gesture against the pressure filling her skull. When she opened them again, she was kneeling on the floor of her studio. Dawn light, gray and weak, filtered through the windows. The impossible hallway was gone. The whispering had subsided to a faint background hum. Like the memory of a sound, the lamp shone steadily relief, sickening and temporary, washed over her. A nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination. It had to be. Shakily, she got to her feet. Her body ached. Her hands were still bruised and smeared with dried blood and plaster dust. She stumbled towards the small bathroom, needing to see her face, to wash away the terror she flicked on the light, and faced the mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale and hollow-eyed. But something was wrong. There was a thin, vertical line running down the center of her reflection-S face, from hairline to chin, a hairline crack, impossibly black. It wasn't on her skin. It was in the reflection itself. As Alara watched, frozen in horror, the crack widened minutely through the dark fissure in the glass. She saw not the wall behind her, but that same glimpse of impossible, shifting geometries. And then her reflection smiled, a slow, deliberate stretching of lips that her own face wasn't mimicking. The eyes in the reflection held a cold, ancient awareness that had never been hers. The whispering surged back, not in the room, but inside her mind, a dry, grinding certainty. Always here. Alara touched her own face. It felt smooth, unbroken, but the crack in the reflection widened further. A dark vein splitting her image, the damp smell of loam and old blood filled the small room. She understood, with a chilling finality that settled into her bones like permafrost. That escape was impossible. The entity hadn't just entered the house. It had entered her. The crack wasn't just in the wall or the mirror. It was within the fragile structure of her own perception, her own reality. She was no longer just living in the Henderson place. She was the Henderson place, a vessel, a conduit, a thin, cracking shell holding back an ancient, ravenous darkness that had finally found a way through. The silence of Blackwater Falls wasn't peaceful. It was the held breath before the inevitable collapse, and the damp. It was the slow, inexorable seep of something primordial, rising from the deep earth, claiming everything it touched, One fractured moment at a time, she stared into the cracked reflection, into the ancient eyes that were now undeniably hers, and knew the horror hadn't ended with the dawn. It had only just begun its long, slow digestion. The house held its breath, and within its walls, Alara began to understand the true meaning of eternity, not as endless time, but as the crushing weight of an ancient presence, patiently waiting for the last fragile barrier to crumble. There was no running, there was only the waiting, and the dreadful, intimate knowledge of the thing that waited within. The crack wasn't a flaw, it was an invitation, and the guest had already taken its seat at the table of her mind. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken terror, broken only by the faint, almost imperceptible sound of plastered dust falling somewhere deep within the walls, and the slow, wet sigh of the earth settling, or perhaps shifting, to make room for something vast and hungry, finally stretching its limbs after a long, long sleep. Escape wasn't impossible. The concept itself was a quaint human delusion. There was only the damp, the dark, the whispering, and the terrifying intimacy of sharing your skin with something that had watched continents rise and fall, and the slow, inevitable widening of the crack. Story 9. The scratching began in the walls, not the frantic scrabbling of mice, but a slow, deliberate rasp, 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 like fingernails dragging across coarse plaster. Alina Vance, therapist by day, insomniac by night, initially dismissed it. Old building, settling timbers, the pipes groaning her apartment complex, was a symphony of mundane anxieties. But this sound burrowed deeper. It wasn't tea in the walls. It felt like the walls themselves were being clawed open from the inside. Alina lived alone, save for her elderly tabby, Malkin. Solitude had been a balm after the divorce, a quiet space to rebuild. Now the silence between the scratches felt thick, suffocating. She defined herself standing frozen in her dimly lit hallway, head cocked, straining to hear it again. Sometimes it came, sometimes it didn't. The uncertainty was worse. Was she imagining it? Hyper-aware. Her own therapist, Dr. Eris, had gently suggested her recent stress might be manifesting somatically. You absorb so much darkness, Alina. It needs an outlet. The outlet, however, felt increasingly external. The scratching migrated. It came from behind the closed door of her unused spare room, then, chillingly, from the underside of her bed, as she lay rigid in the dark. One night, she woke to the sound inches from her ear on the pillow. She scrambled back, heart hammering against her ribs, fumbling for the lamp. Nothing, just the faint indent of her own head on the pillowcase. Paranoia. bloomed like a toxic mold. She started double-checking locks, peering through the peephole for minutes at a time. The cheerful greetings from Mrs. Henderson across the hall sounded suspiciously probing. The maintenance man, knock, became an intrusion. She stopped inviting friends over, canceling plans with brittle excuses, just swamped with case notes. She'd murmur into the phone, her eyes darting around the apartment, searching for movement in the periphery. The air itself felt heavy, tasting faintly metallic. Like old blood and ozone then, came the whispers. They started as faint sussurrations beneath the scratching, barely audible threads of sound that vanished when she focused. Were they words? Just white noise? She couldn't tell. They seemed to coil around her thoughts, tangling them. She'd be writing notes on a client Jeremy, the young man plagued by night terrors of a woman in the wallpaper, and find her own handwriting becoming jagged, spidery. Phrases would appear she didn't recall writing. She asked close, "Can you feel the walls breathing?" It not scratching. It remembering she ripped the page out, ball it up, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Was she dissociating? Having micro-seizures? She started recording her sessions, listening back obsessively for slips, for strange inflections in her own voice. All she heard was the growing tremor beneath her professional calm. Malkin became a barometer. The cat grew listless, refusing to leave the sunbeam on the living room rug. His wide, green eyes followed empty corners with unnerving intensity. One afternoon, Alina found him hunched, hackles raised, hissing at the blank expanse of wall above the bookshelf. The air there felt colder, denser. She reached out a trembling hand. The plaster was smooth, unblemished, yet beneath her fingertips, she thought she felt the faintest, rhythmic thrum, like a pulse buried deep within the structure. The line between her professional assessment and personal terror dissolved. Jeremy's descriptions of the woman in the wallpaper, a shifting, hungry presence trapped behind the floral print, resonated with a horrifying familiarity. His drawings, crude and frantic, depicted elongated figures with too many joints, clawing at the surface. Alina started seeing similar distortions. The patterned curtains in her bedroom would ripple when there was no breeze, the shapes momentarily resolving into grasping hands or wide, screaming mouths before snapping back to innocuous flowers. The shadows cast by her reading lamp stretched and pooled in ways that defied physics, forming pools of absolute black that seemed to swallow light sleep, became a battleground. She'd wake gasping, convinced something heavy had just rolled off her chest. Her dreams were fractured mosaics of damp stone corridors, endless scratching, and a suffocating sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Worse were the periods of lost time, 10 minutes staring blankly at the bathroom mirror, her reflection seeming subtly wrong, the eyes too dark, the smile too wide, finding herself standing in the spare room, dust motes dancing in the sliver of light from the hall, with no memory of walking there, her fingertips tracing invisible patterns on the cold, closed door one morning. She found deep, angry scratches on her own forearm, 4 parallel lines, weeping slightly. She had no memory of doing it. The sight sent a bolt of pure, icy terror through her. Was she sleepwalking, self-harming under stress? Or the whispers coalesced, sitting alone, the apartment preternaturally silent. She heard it clearly. Eleanor, a woman S voice, dry as crumbling paper, filled with an ancient, bottomless sorrow. It came from everywhere, and nowhere. She pulled Jeremy S file. She needed to reread it, to find a clue, a rational explanation for this contagion of dread. Flipping through the pages, her blood froze. Tucked between her clinical observations was a sheet of her own notepaper, covered in that same jagged, spidery handwriting. She'd begun to dread. It wasn't notes about Jeremy. It was a confession. I hurt her. I didn't mean to. She wouldn't stop scratching. She kept saying the walls were hungry. She clawed at them until her fingers bled. She said they were calling her name. My name, Eleanor. I told her she was hysterical, delusional. I told them she needed stronger sedation. They put her in the quiet room. The walls in there, they were soft, like damp earth. She screamed when they put her in. I locked the door. I turned the key. The scratching, it was so loud. And silence. They found her in the morning. She'd torn her nails off trying to dig out. Her face pressed against the wall like she was trying to push through to the other side. Memory slammed into her like a physical blow. Sarah Chen, a patient from 5 years ago, at St. Brigid S. Psychiatric Hospital, a fragile woman, consumed by paralyzing agoraphobia and terrifying hallucinations of being absorbed by her own home. Eleanor had been her primary therapist. She had recommended increased sedation after a particularly violent episode where Sarah had clawed at her own apartment walls. Sarah had been put in the seclusion room for her safety, and she had been found dead the next morning. Her fingers raw and broken, her face contorted in an expression of ultimate terror, pressed against the padded wall, as if straining towards something. Unseen Eleanor had buried it, rationalized it, a tragic case of profound psychosis, leading to self-inflicted trauma. She moved on, or so she thought. The whispers intensified, swirling around her head like a swarm of angry insects. You locked me in, Eleanor. You left me with them. They in the walls, Eleanor. They always in the walls. They hungry panic exploded. she stumbled through the apartment, tearing down curtains, pushing bookshelves away from walls, running her hands frantically over the plaster. "Sarah, Sarah, is that you? I am sorry. I didn't know. I didn't believe." Her voice cracked. Hysterical, the scratching erupted, not from one spot, but from everywhere. The ceiling, the floor, the inside of the refrigerator door. It was deafening. A cacophony of desperate scraping. The air vibrated. Light bulbs flickered wildly, casting strobing, monstrous shadows that danced with malicious glee. Malkin yowled, a sound of pure animal terror, and bolted under the sofa then. Silence, abrupt, absolute, and infinitely more terrifying than the noise. Alina stood panting in the center of her living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her frantic search. The metallic smell was overpowering now, coppery and thick. Cold seeped up from the floorboards, through her socks. She felt watched, not by one entity, but by countless unseen eyes pressing against the fragile barrier of reality a single. Clear whisper cut through the stillness, originating from directly behind her. "They remember you." Alina she whirled around. The large mirror above the fireplace reflected the chaos of the room overturned chair, scattered books, her own wild-eyed, pale reflection. But just behind her reflection, deep within the glass, where the darkness pooled, something else moved, not a solid shape, but a suggestion of form, a distortion like heat haze, but cold, and within that distortion, she saw not Sarah Chen, but countless fragmented impressions, hollow eyes, grasping hands, mouths stretched in silent screams, all pressed against an unseen surface, yearning, scratching, and amidst them, faint but undeniable, the terrified, pleading face of Sarah Chen, her mouth forming Alina's name the revelation, wasn't tea just about Sarah. It was about the walls. They weren't just walls. They were membranes. And she hadn't just locked Sarah in a room. She fed her to what lived behind the quiet places, the spaces between, her disbelief, her professional dismissal, her act of turning the key. It hadn't just condemned Sarah. It had opened a door within herself, Sarah's terror, her desperate scratching, her final moments pressed against the hungry darkness it had bled through the veil, and it recognized Alina. It knew her touch, her fear, her capacity for disbelief that masked a deeper, more terrifying truth. The scratching started again, not loud this time, soft, intimate. It came from the inside of her own skull. Rasp, 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 like fingernails on bone. She pressed her hands to her temples, but the sound was internal. It was the sound of something trying to get out from within her own mind. Or perhaps the sound of something else trying to get in. She looked down at her hands. Fresh, bloody scratches marred the backs of them. She hadn't done it. Or had she? The line was gone, obliterated. Was she haunted by a vengeful ghost? Or was she simply remembering what it felt like to be Sarah Chen, clawing at the impossible walls of her own crumbling sanity, feeling the hungry dark press back. The whispers resumed, a chorus now, layered with Sarah S. voice, and countless others, seeping from the walls, the floor, the very air she breathed, echoing the relentless scratching inside her skull. Let us in, Aliner. We be so hungry. We remember the taste of fear. Your fear. Let us in. Aliner Vance, therapist, stood alone in the center of her unraveling world. The walls breathed around her. The shadows deepened. The scratching within her mind grew louder, more insistent. She knew, with a chilling certainty that settled in her bones like frost, that the door she locked 5 years ago hadn't stayed closed. It had followed her home, and now it was opening from the inside,